Good evening. Hello and welcome to IAedChat Live. We continue to bring you the latest educational news each month, and we are very pleased to be able to reconnect with you tonight. Again, it's been a little while. I think this is the first time we've been live since October, so our first live show of the new year, and we're jacked up. We're happy to be here. We do have a special guest joining us this evening. Dr. Brad Gustafson is here. He's going to be introduced in just a few minutes. And as you can see, as you're following this, there's a live video stream, and we will be taking questions from you, our audience members. So if you want to ask a question, submit that via our hashtag, which is hashtag IAedChat on Twitter. We will monitor this feed throughout the conversation here, and please don't hesitate to use your voice and share your thoughts. We are going to get this podcast, or excuse me, this video show, this live show on our podcast later tonight. So if you've not checked us out on our platforms, Apple Podcasts, Podomatic, Spotify, or the Google Play Market, do that. Subscribe, give us a rating. We would love to hear what you think of our shows. And this also helps our listeners find us on these platforms. So please subscribe, give us a great rating. Thanks. And we're going to start with some introductions. So we'll start. My name is Dan Butler. I am an elementary principal in the Western Dubuque School District, and pleased to be able to connect with you. I'm going to turn things over to Andrea Townsley.
Hey everybody, I'm Andrea Townsley. I am a former fourth grade teacher and instructional coach, and I currently work at Grantwood AEA and around Cedar Rapids as a school improvement consultant. We are missing one of our members of the EdChat moderating team tonight. Nick Duffy's having some audio issues, so I'm sure he will chime in on the back channel. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest tonight. Dr. Brad Gustafson is the 2016 National Distinguished Principal, author, and speaker. He's also a National Board Certified Association 20 to Watch educator. Brad's newest book, Reclaiming Our Calling, uses the power of stories to highlight the tension many of us in education are feeling. Brad is a school leader who understands the role the heart, mind, and hope play in the learning process. We're excited to connect with him tonight. You can connect with Brad via his website, www.bradgustafson.com. And we will also highlight some of his other resources later in the show. Welcome, Brad. We're so happy to have you.
Woohoo! Hey, Andrea and Dan.
I love the energy. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our first question. But like Dan has already said, if you have something that comes to mind, please drop it in our back channel chat on Twitter, and we will be sure to ask Brad your question. All right, Brad, tell us about yourself and your experiences in education.
Sorry, I was going to start back channeling myself some softball questions just to get myself warmed up, but you probably would have caught on to that. So I'm sorry. This is a rocky start. Andrea, what was the question?
All right, my question for you is, tell us about your experiences in education.
Okay, got it. So Dan's probably like, who is this guy? So I was a second grade teacher and loved that, probably in the same way you loved being a fourth grade teacher, Andrea. And I'm an elementary principal now, have been for 11 years, 9 years in my current setting, and am thoroughly in love with that. In addition to serving in that capacity, I do some writing and speaking across the country. And when that's not happening, Dan can attest to this, every once in a while, I connect with friends and we have epic beanbag tournaments on the beach. Am I right, Dan?
So that's true. And I mean, not just any little rundown, get in the backyard and throw the bags around. We're talking the duo that's speaking right now, our national semifinalists. And I was going to say, are you going to bring the t-shirt?
There it is.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
Proof.
Long Beach, California. So that happened. So
that
yeah.
did happen.
All right. Well, from that, I don't know. Can we just end the show? Drop the mic. Let's move on. So anyway, Brad, you've got many passions within education, but let's talk a little bit about that. And then really what drives you? What excites you? What gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, well, it's actually harder to fall asleep because you probably have this too, but you just have all this stuff you're thinking about and excited about and fired up by. But what some of the things that get me really excited, Dan, are when educators are really leaning into things that are hard and difficult for them, that, amplify students' voices and maybe look differently than how the three of us experienced education when we were a kid, and just kind of that possibility thinking. I really get excited by that. And one thing I'm learning to get excited about too, and just being fully transparent, is also about the standard work that's happening in schools that's just foundational to kids learning as well. And there was a time, probably several years ago, where I took my eye off the ball on that front and was probably a little more keyed into just the innovation. And just through process of conversation and stuff, I've come to realize that you really need to have both. You have to have the best practice and just real anchors of learning in your school, and then at the same time, people, and sometimes the very same people, just learning and stretching themselves in this culture that's conducive to risk taking. So those are all very exciting things that I get to be a part of every single day. We had a couple quick examples. We had a former Greenwood student who spoke at our state principal conference this past year, and I feel like that was kind of a pinnacle type experience. I was really excited by, as he was up on stage talking. I mean, literally, I'm going through, because he had been in our school since kindergarten, and I'm just going through picturing all the teachers he had and how they had shaped him, and to see him as a middle schooler literally crushing, just like regular adult keynoters, crushing it up there. I mean, those are things that you just wouldn't trade for the world. So.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those things with us, Brad. I want you to maybe switch gears a little bit and talk to us about your podcast, Unearthed, that you host with one of our friends, Ben Gilpin. Talk to us about how this developed, some of the content that you guys have shared, and then why you guys decided to start podcasting.
Well, maybe I'll start there. I'm feeling like this is going to be I knew you were going to ask about the podcast, so I had to bring this t-shirt out. Now, this is not, Ben and I do a podcast called Unearthed, Unearthed ED. This is not our Unearthed t-shirt, but if you read that, it says Real Deal Ed, right? So the backstory, this shirt has never seen the light of day outside my house. So I feel like we're in this secret club now. Ben and I started a podcast called Real Deal Ed, and if you search hard enough, you might be able to track down an episode if we ever published one. I'm not even sure. But I think he and I, we were friends, and we just wanted to start a conversation and have some games embedded, so it was a little bit different. But what we found was it wasn't exactly mission driven, and it wasn't working. It wasn't taking things deeper. It was more just two friends probably having fun and maybe not helping people as much as we would have liked. So we recognized the error of our ways, and unfortunately it wasn't until after I ordered the t-shirts, but we realized like we can actually have conversations that help people and kind of respond to the need and the energy on Twitter and things going on in the world, and that help ourselves too, right? So that's where Unearthed Ed was born. It was honestly through that failure or failing, and now I get to connect with Ben on a regular basis. And our goal, and this is a skill that I'm still really developing or trying to develop, is like taking things deeper, so that when we talk about something that might seem obvious, similar to maybe what I shared earlier, like I want to amplify student voice. So what we try to do is say, well, what does that look like and why? And then what might people who believe something differently say, and just wade into that water. So it's turned into this neat thing, and he and I have a blast doing it. And you already know this, but for those who don't know Ben Gilpin, he's at Benjamin Gilpin on Twitter. Excellent follow and school leader. But Ben has this ability to just come across as the most down-to-earth, friendly, approachable person on the planet. But the thing that you wouldn't necessarily know just in a 10-second conversation is he's incredibly deep and reflective. And it's just a gift, because sometimes I'm a little more like just sharing, as if the t-shirt parade wasn't evidence of that enough. But the combination of us two just having fun, talking education, and leaning into these things, him in his really reflective way, and me just having fun, being appreciative that he tolerates it, it's kind of created this neat little thing. So I feel like we have maybe almost 70 shows done over like 4 years or so.
Yeah, and you one thing that I know as a fairly regular listener to this podcast is you're tackling some pretty tough topics, I would say. I wouldn't say just the your typical feel-good stuff and easy stuff for that matter. In fact, I mean, you had Dr. Robert Marzano on there, gosh, I don't know, a couple of months ago about a tweet that he had made. And just, it was almost not really a call out, but like, hey, let's have some clarification. Let's have some deeper conversation about this student engagement tweet that you made. And things like that. So I applaud you guys for doing the work that you're doing and digging in a little bit.
Oh, appreciate you mentioning that. That's actually a really good example, because for Ben and I, what we've noticed, I'll just speak for myself. I have a hard time entering really charged conversations on Twitter. It's not that I don't care about the conversation, but I care about the relationship that oftentimes can lead to a really good conversation. But when that's not present and you don't necessarily know someone that you're talking with or wanting to try to lean in and actually seek to understand, it can be really difficult. So that's actually another reason we have the podcast, is because we can have a real conversation, slow it down a little bit above and beyond 140 characters or however many characters Twitter allows now. And with the Marzano thing, he caught a ton of flack and kind of shared that he had a team that had been helping him tweet, I guess. So that was more out of context from a book. But anyway, we sought to understand, slowed it down, tried to look from it through several different angles. And we're also, Dan, tackling other things that are honestly uncomfortable, or they're areas that we don't know much about. One in particular, recently we did a show on school disasters. So we just talked to some folks who had lived that and led through that hurricane. I forget the couple hurricanes these women had led their schools through, but just took some tips and kind of stuff that I can actually apply to my role. Maybe not with a hurricane, but with something unexpected that might happen, whether it's a weather event or a plumbing disaster. I mean, you name it, the list could go on. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, just some topics that are a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit difficult to dig into, but you guys do so in a masterful way. And I know I appreciate it. And our followers, if you're not checking out Unearthed on iTunes, do that, because it's going to be definitely an entertaining podcast, but also you're going to learn some things from that as well.
Right, and we might have some real deal Ed T-shirts for the next few people who subscribe to Unearthed. No, I'm just kidding.
I had no idea.
Unfortunately, Brad, I wasn't able to find any of those episodes. So if you want to give us some of those golden nuggets, I'm sure our followers would love to hear some of those beginning of the days podcasts.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been scrubbed from the internet. So, my goodness.
All right, Andrea, you want to take the next one, or you want me to take this one?
I can take it.
All right, let's do that.
Your latest book, Reclaiming Our Calling, just came out. So, Brad, give the listeners and give us a preview of this book and what inspired you to write it.
So, largely, the inspiration is through working with kids and educators in our school across the country, just hearing certain things come up time and time again that people were wrestling with. And they were some of the same things that I'm wrestling with. And just in a nutshell, I'll call it a tension in education. And Dan, I think it was Dan asked earlier, or maybe it was you, Andrea, why do you get up in the morning, Brad? Or what fires you up in the morning? And there are a lot of things that excite me, but some of the things that do not excite me, that I think are actually destructive, not testing in general, because meaningful assessment is invaluable. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise or just demonize all testing, that's just not a well thought out argument. So the struggle that I had, or the tension I had, is when we are being pressured, and maybe it's an internal self pressure. Maybe it's a systemic pressure, but to rely so heavily on one test or metric that would label a student, a teacher, a school, to the point where they're going to miss out on opportunities or consequences are going to happen. That's the tension, because that's not what I signed up for, and that's not what I feel is best for kids. So then the question became, well, what do we do about it? Because it's one thing to say kids are more than numbers, but it's another to lead that and live that and work with people who believe in helping kids learn at a high level, mastering the standards and such, while also refusing to ignore passions that kids have and the innate gifts that they come to school with, what tested and untested, right? So a lot of times people will say, myself included, sometimes if people talk about teaching the whole child or teaching the whole learner, there's this subconscious thinking that, oh, this person is soft on assessment or soft on learning. And I assure you, that's not the case. We really want our kids to learn at a high level, but we can't do it at the expense of, like, oftentimes I'll just think about, what if we had the next Mother Teresa or Pele? I mean, the list goes on, just talented person in whatever field that person is passionate about, artist, musician, mathematician. If they were sitting in our school, in our classrooms right now, are we equipped and focused on recognizing that and cultivating that? And if the answer isn't a resounding yes, then I really think society is missing out. So the book is the kind of a fun, unexpected thing. If you haven't checked it out yet, it's a mashup of a novel and a PD book. So it's going to be a little bit different than most professional development reads. There's actually a story arc, and you'll get to know some people through the course of the book really, really well. So it's an easy, I don't know, like a beach read or a cabin read, however, like sitting on the couch read. It's gobbled up, but it has these take-home things, and educators from across the country and beyond kind of sharing, like, this is how I navigate these waters. This is how I navigate the tension and stay really true to who our kids can be, not only in the classroom, but outside the classroom.
That's fantastic. Again, that's Reclaiming Our Calling, everybody. And you can find that on Amazon. And we would encourage you to check that out. That was just released a couple of months ago. And get on that. A great read for you to check out. So, Brad, I know this about you just from knowing you over the years, because you've taught me a lot in this arena related to digital tools. But I know that digital tools play a pretty big role within your world. So if you wouldn't mind, talk to our viewers about some of the tools that you're using that that are helping you out lately, that are increasing your work, amplifying student voice, whatever that happens to be.
Sure. Our team has been immersed in video work for several years. One of the big things, and this actually connects to what I said earlier about helping with achievement, but also student passions, right? In the area of literacy, some of our teams and grade levels have had conversations about, like, our reading logs having the effect we want them to have on learning and developing a level of literacy and the accountability piece, and et cetera. So there's one grade in particular I'm thinking about that has immersed themselves in video work, and part of it is just kind of a daily conversations with natural book talking. And if you haven't heard of book talking before, it just basically means, like, Andrea, Dan, you guys, if you both go to a movie, you want to talk about it usually, right? That's just a normal thing. Or if you go to a great restaurant, you want to have that conversation and tell people what to order or what not to order. Books, we want to be the same way. And most people don't go home and log the food they had at a restaurant that was good, bad, or otherwise for accountability purposes. Most people don't, after they go see a movie, turn in a form to a superior, if you will, right? So trying to line up using technology and tools to set kids up for things they naturally gravitate to and want to do, because the whole point of learning, right, is to cultivate that curiosity and that lifelong learning thing. That's more than a mantra or something that we just talk about. We actually want to do that. So from a digital tool standpoint, using video to let kids share, like, 30-second book talks. And there's a hashtag out there that's literally hashtag 30-second book talk. Jen Lagarde and I use TouchCast and various video production tools to connect with educators around the world, and we do an annual kind of a book talk tournament. But the whole point of that is to let teachers and students in on it, and then they go and they repeat it in their schools and do a better job than I could ever dream. So that's kind of an exciting thing that we're seeing. And then I try to hit on the why. Like, why we do it is because we want the same goal that people who are really finding success with reading logs, we have that same goal, but we just want it to be deeper and more sustainable. I'm curious, Dan, while I kind of collect my thoughts, and Andrea, what tools have other people shared, and what are you seeing, whether it's new or something that's been around a while?
I'll jump on that one right away. I'll let Andrea talk in just a minute. But one thing that I learned from you many years ago was the use of TouchCast and green screen productions, whether that's video newsletters, is something that we've dabbled in within my school to engage more people as we move forward with that, rather than just the beautiful paper newsletter or whatever that happens to be. But just those video things to engage our people of where they are. And TouchCast is a tremendous tool. You've mentioned that. Brad is an absolute master at using TouchCast, and I've learned a great deal from him. But gosh, it's almost a one-stop shop for your your backgrounds and what you need to put together a really high quality video on an iPad for that matter. So that's one that's been big that we've been dabbling into. And in fact, we've established kind of a studio within our school, and we continue to add on to this with lights and green screens in a backdrop and so forth, just because we're finding value in that. And we're finding that kids are able to do many authentic projects. And as you talked about with like book talks, maybe they're doing some type of a presentation or a video that they're putting together to share with not only their classmates, but then also families too, and then a variety of live streaming things. So that's been on my mind, but I learned that from you many years ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago.
Cool.
I guess I would say as a parent, my son's school is a seesaw school. So, you know, along the lines of what you guys have been talking about, he's able to take a picture, he's in 3rd grade, take a picture of the book that he read and then record a reflection on what he thought of the book. So it kind of logs the what he likes and dislikes about books. So he can go back when we're looking over that together at home. And, you know, it reminds him of some of the books that he really liked to go maybe to the library and check out another book along those lines. So I would say Seesaw definitely on more than one level. And then also Flipgrid. And I know some people on the EdChat back channel have talked about both Seesaw and Flipgrid, but I would say reflection is huge with Flipgrid and really just getting your thoughts on anything. I mean, we can use it as a PD tool. Students can use it. I just love how diverse it is.
Right. And to build on what I heard you say, Andrea, and Dan too, with the video, like what I get really excited by is kids creating, and part of that could be just metacognitively sharing their reflections, right? That because Seesaw is just an incredible tool. It's one thing for a student to go home and say, I did this, this, and this, and learn today, even though at my house that doesn't always happen. It's more like a recess or whatever. But anyway, absent the difficulty of even having that conversation with kids, when we start to tap into these tools where kids are actually creating and then, you know, digitally curating and pushing it out to an audience that's authentic to them, which a lot of times at the elementary level is their family, that's a really powerful thing and game changer to help almost build empathy, support, and partnership between home and school so that they can really see. The other tool, after hearing you both, another thing I just thought of is, so several years ago, we did the Google expeditions in our school with the goggles, VR goggles, virtual reality. And then recently, our PTA generously helped us invest in several more for kids. And that's a really cool thing. But as kind of a cautionary tale or something just to think about, we also have a 360 fly camera where kids can create their own. And it's almost this juxtaposition. But we just want to make sure, and this is, I get excited by this, we want to make sure that we're not just setting kids up to consume amazing content, right? We want them to really be co-creators in this connected ecosystem and really invent the future technology. And that's a little bit harder to do if they're purely in consumption mode. So this 360 fly camera, when we got the thing, we didn't really know, well, we didn't know anything about it, but it's been kind of cool. And we're still in the infancy with putzing around with it. But it's really cool to see kids now from time to time create their own VR content instead of just go into the studio and dial in what other people have tried or created, I mean.
So many awesome resources being shared on the back channel. So definitely something that we're going to want to probably archive the Twitter chat as well to put with this video. So I guess moving into maybe a next question, and make sure you guys that are watching, if you have questions for Brad, drop them in our Twitter chat and we will definitely ask those to him. So I would say our next question is, what advice would you offer to new educators entering the field? And by the same token, how about maybe experienced educators? So maybe new educators, experienced educators, and what advice do you have?
Well, one thing is, I think it's twofold. Understanding what people's strengths are and what they value. Every single person you're working with, and even your students, right? Before trying to kind of teach to their deficiency or deficit or area of need, but really understanding what their strengths are and passions. That's a really important thing. Again, it goes with colleagues as well. And then knowing that about yourself too. Jen Lagarde and I often joke about something called the donut theorem. I think there's even a hashtag for it now, but basically, to use the analogy, if you could picture a big old jelly-filled donut, and in the middle, obviously, is the jelly. I like to say that that's like the sweet spot and the best part of the donut. And I think oftentimes the business of school crunches around the foundational edge, but we're not as intentional about tapping into our own jelly or strengths and talents and passions, and same with kids. But imagine if we want to teach kids to, whatever the case may be, read, write, um, compute, et cetera, invent, doing that while kind of wading through and tapping into their jelly or getting a bite of jelly every time is a much more powerful thing that they will literally own and not want to stop doing, as opposed to kind of staying away or not really thinking about that. So to new educators, I would just be keenly aware of your strengths and try to incorporate those into your day. Like Andrea, I think you mentioned the video newsletter, or maybe it was Dan, but I mean, that's a prime example. So I love video and communicating and having kids create and doing that with them. So we do in our school now, part of our video newsletter is we call them book talk DJs, where we all dress up like DJs and have records and glasses and green screen studio in the background. And we collaborate with another school and we splice these together. But that's part of my jelly, and kids dig it too, right? So here we're wading in these passionate waters while we're doing the core business of communicating with families and kind of showcasing learning that's happening. So you can do both. And probably in this day and age where teaching and leading in a school is probably more like drinking water out of a fire hose, just to catch your bearings, you've got to spend some time and really commit to having your passions be part of that. And your passion doesn't have to be fancy or related to technology. It can be like just loving kids and making sure to spend protected time with them each day, whether that means at the end of the day having a conversation or to kick off your day, whatever the case may be.
So I have a bit of an issue with the donut theorem. And what if it's cream or it's custard in the middle? Because that's custard. Where I'm going to go.
I mean, I could tell in Long Beach when we had that beanbag tournament, some of your throws were off, and I could tell you were probably daydreaming about custard donuts back then. We would have won the whole thing had you been more focused, Dan.
My shoulders are still hurting almost 4 years later from the amount of carrying that I had.
That is so great.
No, I love it. I love it. So let's move on to another question here, and another book that you wrote. You wrote Renegade Leadership in 2016, and if you wouldn't mind, provide our viewers with just kind of the Reader's Digest version of this and kind of your inspiration for writing this, because I know it kind of ties with what we've been talking about a little bit about this innovation, digital tools, etc.
Okay, I'll give you the shortest Reader's Digest version ever. So Renegade Leadership, the subtitle is Creating Innovative Schools for Digital Age Students. So that frames it pretty well. But there are several chapters on pedagogy, and I call it the Renegade Code. And it's just kind of like the how it could be done. So instead of talking about what tool should I use, it's more like, here are the things that we can and should be thinking about, and then choose the tool based on your learners and that approach or that pedagogy. So now even when I'm leading staff meetings or communicating with families, I think about like the Renegade Code, and C stands for collaboration. And again, this is not rocket science, right? It's just, and the O is my favorite, student ownership. So just simple things like, with this office communication that I have to do, how might I increase student ownership? Almost like a sound amp. You don't have to raise everything and do everything perfectly, but just toy around with some of the levers, and really incredible things will happen with kids and kind of the product or the experience. So that's the book. I started delving into novel mode instead of Reader's Digest mode. You're supposed to interrupt me, Dan. Come on.
That's great. That's good. That's really good. So we're moving right along, and I'll ask another question, and this one might be a little bit of a longer answer for you, but if you could change one thing within the current educational landscape, what would that be?
Boy, have you ever had someone want to hear what you would say first? Is that poor caddying?
Sure.
I want to see. Here's the issue, Dan. I just like it. I like to reflect on things. I don't just want to give you an answer. So what? Yeah. Talk to me. Talk to me here.
So one thing that I think about, and this ties into a little bit of your conversation earlier, I think the culture based on over-the-top assessment, I would change tomorrow if I could. And I am with you in the fact that good assessment, good, solid, valid assessment is huge. That matches the instruction that we're providing to students, because that's our check. That's our barometer to see how we are moving, how our kids are growing, etc. However, the hyper-focused environment and the tension, the stress, the anxiety that that has created, and just the ranking that could potentially occur, whether that's through a school report card or your school has these different sanctions and they're being penalized for that, and having to go through different hoops, particularly possibly to jump through because of that, based on, you know, just a 1 week high stakes assessment. That culture that exists around that, I would change that. Now, it's the answer to that is not getting rid of the assessment, not getting rid of standardized assessment at all. However, just realizing that there are multiple success criteria to measure the success of a school, of a student, of a faculty, etc. And if I had the opportunity, I would do that and try to continue to do that. And I think we do that by showcasing, highlighting, communicating about what really does matter to us. Connection with students, meeting their diverse needs, meeting their academic needs, but also meeting their social emotional needs, and knowing, creating an environment where students know they have an adult in their corner at every turn. And I think we're making some progress. And I would say even in the last couple of years, when I say we, I mean our system. And I think our state is recognizing that a little bit more as well. But we're not there yet. And we need to continue to move forward. So that was a little bit longer for me, but that's my story. And I'm kind of sticking to it right now.
All I can say is I've got the smartest beanbag partner in the country. That was awesome.
Thanks, man.
One thing to make sure I don't totally skirt the question is similar to what you said, Dan, but as I was reflecting, I kind of want to embed a how into it too. So, because I think there is a path forward. I think we can actually do this. I think each of us can take a meaningful step forward and own our destiny and what we will change, not if we could, because I actually think we all can and should. But in Reclaiming Our Calling, the first few chapters set out the moral foundation of the work. And part of the core, and actually at the very center of it, is transcendent learning, or basically learning that lasts. And that's that simple litmus test right there, like asking ourselves with each decision as a leader, whether it's teacher leader or school leader, is what I'm about to do or ask my staff to do or ask this student to do for the purpose of learning that will last and serve that child for a lifetime or a really long time? Or is it to inflate or increase a metric that could fade? And I refer to that as surface level learning, that kids don't necessarily take with them. And there's a lot of research to say they don't take with them when it's not part of the core, it's not sticky, and they don't take it with them. So for me, that next step, and here's how I try to live it out, like in PLC meetings, just asking questions. And before we carte blanche send packets home to study for a test, right? Just having that conversation, like, what's our goal and what is best for this learner? And I'm not saying those are easy conversations, but when they start to become ingrained in habit and in our vernacular, that's how we start to take back the system. And ironically, we are the system. So the conversations and decisions that we make and begin to kind of influence even beyond our walls really can make a big difference. So in a nutshell, that's not only what I think we should do, that's to a degree what we are doing and what we all can do tomorrow. How about you, Andrea?
So I guess I would say on Dan's 5-minute soapbox, he kind of led into what I was going to say is really just creating self-directed learners in our classroom. and understanding that not all kids learn the same. So I'm going to go back to my default talking about my two kids, learn completely different. So, and I do feel like classrooms are starting to move toward this, but we cannot design our lessons to average. We have to, I'm reading a book right now called UDL Theory and Practice. So it talks about universal design. We cannot design lessons and design learning for our classrooms to the middle. We have to design the learning that takes place in our classroom to the edges. So that's really one of the things that I love about some of the classrooms that I get to be in and hear about in my role. But we definitely have a lot of work to do in that area. So really just embracing all different kinds of learners in our classroom and knowing that there's not one right way to learn, and having more people embrace that, I guess, is something that I wish would speed up a little bit, because we're living it right here and it's not going to go away. We have to make sure we design to the edges.
Sometimes I feel like there's a push, rightfully so, to personalize in education and just make things meaningful for each learner. But I consider that a really good thing. But there's also this pressure, and this is part of that tension, to standardize how we're personalizing. And part of that is to be efficient. Part of it's because teachers are not necessarily set up for success with the amount of time to collaborate and plan that they could or should be. And also, this is just more of a reflective wonderment. I wonder if having so much emphasis on one metric or test, because that's a very standardized thing in most cases, I wonder if that actually takes away from some other metrics that we might, maybe that haven't been invented yet, or at least that I'm not aware of. Like, what if there were more personalized success metrics for individual kids, in addition to or above and beyond that one? I just wonder what might happen if even our assessments reflected teaching to the edges and really being responsive to the hearts that we're serving too. And that's a big theme. We were talking during the pre-show a little bit about like the hearts that enter our school every day, not to mention the hearts that educators have. Like, ignoring one of our greatest gifts, the compassion and empathy and genuine care that we have to help kids and one another. I mean, I see that time and time again in like every teacher I've ever talked to. That's what we care about, is people and their learning and growth and capacity. But when that's ignored or crowded out, whether it's because of time or whatever the case may be, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, why not leverage our gifts and just kind of own them instead of being apologetic for them? Did I beat Dan's 5-minute soapbox mark there? No, I was at 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So
no, you did great. You did great. We do have a question. Is that what you're going to say, Dan?
I was going to say, if I'm set up and I've got the microphone in front of my face and I'm asked a question, I'm taking full advantage. All right. And Andrea knows me long enough that's going to happen. So.
That's awesome.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I was just stating the obvious, Dan.
That was great. Yeah, it's hard. It's kind of, I was kind of even reflecting as I was listening, Dan, great sharing, but I was also thinking, yeah, I should be able to just answer that right away. But part of it is when you care so much, you kind of want to actually have some meaning behind it. So I appreciate you buying me time, partner.
We have a question from one of our viewers. Brian Claft has a question for you. He says that when you were talking about pedagogy, what is one pedagogy flip that a veteran teacher who was not raised in the digital age can do to energize their learning space? Thank you so much, Brian, for your question.
Yeah, well, so veteran teachers have the skills and they're masters at knowing kids and relationships. And granted, we're generalizing here, right? Because all teachers are different and gifted differently. But in general, they know how to know their kids like nobody else. And newer teachers need to catch up to them and kind of learn how to do that, right? Because that's what learning to teach involves. So I would say just tapping into that, because as veteran teachers, like if they're noticing their kids like whether it's a hobby, a video game, something that's in pop culture, whatever the case may be, to the extent that we can tap into that in how kids are learning, either from a process standpoint or even from the product they're creating. And again, I don't mean to beat the video horse dead, but that's a prime example for some kids. I mean, a lot of times I'll talk to kids and they want to be YouTubers, and they're not kidding. They're really excited by it. But I mean, who's helping them harness those skills, right? And the answer is not many people, unless it's happening in a school. Really, the way that kids think they're learning how to be YouTubers, also known for skeptical adults, how to communicate effectively and appropriately, right? And be a leader with a video camera present, but we'll call it YouTubing for now. But when those skills are built in school, and veteran teachers can pay attention to what kids care about, and here's a prime example, and then kids can communicate what they care about to the world while also tying into the standards and communicating them in a way that makes sense. Really cool things that can happen for a lifetime of learning, not just a test or not just learning for a moment. And here's an example, if in case that didn't make sense. So one of our teachers knew one of her students, was rocking the state standards in math, just crushing them. And he liked drone technology. He loved technology in general, but he also liked drones. So while her class was doing the perimeter and area in a more traditional way, she tapped into, just by knowing this kiddo, and let him create some YouTube videos that taught kids how to calculate area and perimeter. But get this, and this is where it was even further personalized or differentiated. And I was able to assist just a little bit on this, but he took some aerial footage of our school playgrounds, just of our school playground using a drone, and then calculated the area and perimeter without measuring it. And basically he had like a large tarp laid out, and he knew the dimensions of it, 10 by 10 tarp, and he graph paper and scaled it. I don't know if any of this is making sense, but long story short, veteran teacher who knew her kiddo, knew her student really well, and then just followed that and tapped into his passion. Now, was this teacher an expert on drone technology? Absolutely not. Here's another super quick example. Last year, we had a teacher at a different grade level. She reached out to me and said, this student is really into computer programming. And I think she said coding too. Can you help, or what can we do? And we just reached out to our PLN, got some ideas. And long story, there's this product out there. It's elementary friendly, but kids can build their own computers. So we thought his ownership would be higher, not just if we put him in front of coding, pre-made thing, but how about build your own computer, then learn to code that, right? So that's what we did. And this was a really veteran teacher. So from a pedagogy standpoint, we hit on the student ownership, we hit on the collaboration. And it wasn't just teacher or educator to student, but there was some adult collaboration, like knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and through just a process of networking, setting this kid up to do incredible things, to the point where it was spreading. And then this student's friends were getting into this. And even a year later, I'm still working with this kid because he's no longer in that grade level now. And now he wants to create instructional videos for other kids in our school so they can learn to put the computer together and code. I mean, both those really cool stories started with a teacher who knew her kids.
Yeah, I think that's just a really powerful thing. And like you said, it's almost just like asking the question of the kid, like, how do you learn best? What's going to work for you? Or I want to do this, and it's removing a barrier, or asking a question, opening the door of, this teacher doesn't know the first thing about setting up a computer or coding or whatever, but was open to it, asked the question, and here we are. Let's remove some barriers and take the training wheels off and let the kid go. And I think as educators, one of the greatest things that we can do is simply ask, figure out where our people are coming from, and then be open to maybe knocking down a few of those walls, removing some of those barriers, and let it roll.
Yeah, and so I've been guilty of the opposite too, Dan. Like several years ago, when our school got its first 3D printer, that thing sat on my office counter behind my desk for months, collecting dust, to the point where I was getting anxiety, feeling like this could be really cool for kids. I don't know how to work that thing. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to assemble it. And then one day we thought, well, why, God forbid people rely on me to be the gatekeeper for things in our school, because I won't be able to, no teacher or single educator will be able to learn everything that their kids need them to. So what we did is we got together like 5 kids who were really interested in 3D printing, and we let them put the thing together. And I just sat by and assisted and make sure no one got electrocuted, right? And even as they were plugging things into weird, I was a couple cringeworthy moments where I was nervous because it was a semi-expensive piece of equipment. But by the end of that, like half hour or so, they put the thing together and they plugged it in, and if you've ever seen a 3D printer, or at least certain models, it's like a spaceship taking off, and it was glorious. And the smell of warm plastic, it was just a magical moment. But had people had to rely on me, aka the barrier, never would have happened. Flip the switch, and maybe this gets to Brian's question too, for when he was asking about veteran teachers and pedagogy. Like, I don't think the second we feel like we have to be the answer, I think we've already kind of robbed our kids of some opportunities and their voice. But when we show them like what a learning mindset looks like, and then empower them to learn alongside us, or even lead the learning, there is no limit to their learning.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. So, Brad, we're going to close up with this last one here, unless we have some other questions come in the next couple of minutes, but we are winding down. But the last one that we would have for you is just what's next for Brad Gustafson, excuse me. What's the immediate or distant future hold for you? What's on your mind?
Cool. So kind of coming full circle, just really loving connecting with our team and our people at school, finding great joy in that. And then weekends and evenings sometimes, this parallel work that supports, and it all comes together and just kind of form the perfect picture. But just investing in, I joke, but I call it creating a child-centered ruckus, like having conversations that matter for kids, but might force me to be a little bit uncomfortable with how I led that previous meeting or how I handled that interaction, right? Because maybe kids need to be slightly different. So I'm invested in, we have this thing called the Underground Book Club, and you can hashtag Underground Book Club, hashtag Reclaiming Our Calling. We're just a community of learners now that are leaning into conversations about like, let's talk about the heart of education. Let's talk about the mind. Let's talk about the hope and the foundation, and then where we're doing really well and what we might be able to change tomorrow just as a result of having the conversation. So I'm just spending time on that, Dan, and loving it.
Trying to capture some of those things on our back channel so people can come back and refer to them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of go over some of the resources that we have to make sure people are aware of how to find you and what to look for. I did post a link to Amazon that has both of your books on there. But Brad has, you can find him on Twitter, obviously, Gustafson, at Gustafson Brad. His website is bradgustafson.com. He's made it really easy for us. He has a podcast that he referred to earlier, School Leadership Unearthed. And then also the books that he's referred to tonight are Renegade Leadership. And then the one that came out recently was Reclaiming Our Calling. So what I'm going to do now, Brad, is offer you just a minute or two to offer some closing thoughts for us here. We really greatly appreciate the time you've taken for us tonight on EdChat, and just take it away.
Oh, sure. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I think the biggest thing to anyone listening is, educators, there's an amazing spirit of helping. We want to succeed because when we succeed, our kids succeed, but we also want each other to succeed. So I would love if someone has a tool or a better way to do something in conjunction with what I mentioned. I mentioned the computer our student built, but if you have some cool resources, I would love. Everything that we do in our school was really a result of conversations and people sharing. So if you have other tools or cool approaches or things to think about our articles, I would just love it. And I'll do my best if you have questions to kind of interact and try to help too. That's all I got, Andrea.
I love it. Keep the conversation going. We're going to go ahead and let Dan take it away with some upcoming Iowa events and national events. We've got a lot going on this spring, so I'm going to let Dan kind of talk about that.
You bet. Thanks, Andrea. So we've got a couple of housekeeping things, but coming up, guys, is EdCamp Iowa. And as you may or may not know, this is the largest EdCamp event in the country, as we're hosting at 5 sites simultaneously. So if you've not registered and signed up for that, do that. The Southwest location, and this is going to be Saturday, February 23rd, if I did not mention that. The Southwest location, that's at Abraham Lincoln High School in Council Bluffs. Northwest is in Spencer High School in Spencer. Northeast is at Independence High School in Independence. The Southeast location is at Liberty High School in North Liberty. And the central location will be at Norwalk High School in Norwalk, just outside of Des Moines. More information, if you're interested in checking that out, can be found at tinyurl.com/EdCampIA 2019. Also, coming up in April is the Iowa One-to-One Institute. That is going to take place on Wednesday, April 3rd in Des Moines. The Leadership Day takes place the day before, and this will be on Tuesday, April 2nd, and the person leading that is special guest AJ Giuliani. So he'll be doing the Leadership Day work on the 2nd, and then the regular conference takes place on April 3rd. Take a look at iowa1to1.com for more info. Then there's a couple more. Hang with us. Iowa ASCD is going to host Jenny Donahue with learning focused around collective efficacy on April 11th and 12th. And you can check that out, tinyurl.com/Iowa ASCD 2019 to register. Jenny's pretty awesome, and the work that she does around collective efficacy is pretty great. So that would be one you'd want to check out. The 5th annual standards-based grading conference and school visits, that's going to be April 15th and or April 16th with featured presenters AJ Giuliani, Tom Murray, and Matt Townsley. That's going to be in Coralville. And check out that. Visit www.gwaea.org for more details. And the last one, a little bit into the future, but this is good to know. Grant Wood is welcoming back John Hattie and Peter DeWitt on October 16th of 2019 in Cedar Rapids. And again, go to www.gwaea.org for more details. You heard me right. Yeah, that's John Hattie and Peter DeWitt. That'll be pretty awesome. All right, guys.
As a mini plug, Peter DeWitt is also an beanbag player. He was at the tournament we were in. Although I don't think he was a national semifinalist.
He was not, but he is a recurring guest on Iowa EdChat Live as well. Beanbag player and close friend of John Hattie and a pretty awesome educator. So that's coming up in October with Peter and John. So I'm going to close things up, guys, and I want to thank you for joining us, sharing your thoughts on Iowa EdChat Live, which is always the last Sunday of the month. And now that we're back in the swing, we will be doing a live show once per month from January through the month of really October. So check that out, last Sunday of the month. And we've got a great lineup coming to you in the next couple of months. A very special thank you to Brad Gustafson tonight and for joining us, sharing his thoughts and his passions. We really appreciate Brad being on with us. And then for our viewers here, be sure to follow some of the new friends you met tonight and continue to follow the hashtag IAedChat to continue the conversation. And you will find a great deal of resources if you are interested on our website. That's tinyurl.com/IAedChat. We are going to be off next week because there's a football game. I think there's a football game on next week. So the Patriots and the Rams will be playing in the Super Bowl. So we're going to take the week off, but we will be back the following week, which I think would be probably February 10th. All righty. But until that time, be the change. Good night, everybody.